The voicemail was still playing when I felt my stomach drop. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, and I was standing in the kitchen of our little house in Columbus, still in my pajamas, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. My brother's voice came through the phone speaker with that familiar, easy confidence he always had, the kind that used to make me think he had everything figured out. "Hey sis, just checking in. Call me when you get a chance." Nothing unusual, except I hadn't spoken to him in 3 weeks. And the night before, I'd gotten an automated alert from my bank, a credit inquiry, on my account, one I hadn't made. I set my mug down on the counter and stood very still for a moment. My daughter was upstairs getting ready for school. My husband had already left for work. The house was quiet except for the sound of cartoons drifting down from the hallway, and I remember thinking, almost absurdly, that it was a really nice morning outside. The kind of fall day where the light comes in golden and you want to just sit on the porch and drink your coffee slowly. I didn't sit on the porch. I opened my laptop and pulled up my credit monitoring app instead. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without understanding who my brother is, and more importantly, who he has always been. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the golden child in our family in the way that a lot of oldest sons are. Not because he was exceptional, but because my parents simply expected less accountability from him. He was charming and funny, and everyone liked him immediately. Teachers, neighbors, our parents' friends. He had a way of walking into a room and making people feel like something interesting was about to happen. What he also had was a pattern. It started small when we were younger, borrowing things and not returning them, promising to do things and quietly not doing them, always having a reason why something wasn't his fault. As we got older, the pattern stayed exactly the same. It just had higher stakes. He borrowed money from our parents twice that I know of. The first time was in his mid-20s when he was between jobs, which lasted about 2 years. They gave him $4,000, which they called a loan, which he never paid back. The second time was closer to $10,000, which my mother told me about in confidence, crying on the phone one Sunday afternoon, saying she didn't want to tell my father because it would cause a fight. I asked her if she told my brother that she expected it back. She said, "Of course, honey. Of course he knows. He never paid it back either. I should have seen what came next from a mile away." The thing is, when it's your own family, you keep finding reasons why it's different this time. You keep telling yourself that people change, or that surely he wouldn't do that to you specifically, or that the situation is more complicated than it looks from the outside. I was 38 years old and I still hadn't fully learned that lesson. It started about 6 months before all of this. My husband and I had been saving for 3 years to put a down payment on a bigger house. Our daughter was 7, we were hoping to have another child, and our current place, a sweet little 2-bedroom in a neighborhood we loved, was getting tight. We had a savings account we'd been feeding carefully. $42,000. Not a fortune, but ours, earned slowly. My brother called me in April with what he described as an opportunity. He'd been working in property management for about 2 years at that point, which already felt like a miracle because it was the longest he'd held any job since his late 20s. He told me he'd found a property, a duplex in a neighborhood that was about to blow up, and that he had a contact who could get us in at below market value, but only if we moved fast. He wasn't asking for my savings. He was very clear about that. He was asking if I'd be willing to put my name on a co-investment agreement, a legal document he'd already had drawn up by a real estate attorney, to show his lender that the deal had backing. "It's just paperwork," he said. "You don't actually move any money. I just need to show I have a partner." I said I'd think about it. I talked to my husband, who was skeptical. He asked if I'd seen the documents. I hadn't. He asked if I'd talked to our own lawyer. I hadn't done that either. I called my brother back and said I needed to see everything before I agreed to anything, and he sent over a folder of documents that looked official enough that I didn't know exactly what I was looking at. I told myself I'd look into it more carefully. I got busy with work, with our daughter's school stuff, with the general motion of life. My brother followed up twice, gently, not pushy. The third time he called, he said the window was closing and he just needed a yes or no. I said yes. I did not call a lawyer. I did not read every page of those documents carefully. I signed electronically and told myself it was just paperwork. That was my mistake. My big, enormous, I should have known better mistake. For about 4 months, nothing happened. I genuinely forgot about it. Summer came. Our daughter finished second grade. My husband and I started looking at houses in a suburb about 20 minutes north of the city. We had a realtor. We had pre-approval for a mortgage. We were close enough to our goal that we'd started talking about a timeline. And then it was October, and there was a credit inquiry on my account that I hadn't made. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up everything. The inquiry was from a commercial lender I didn't recognize, in the amount of $85,000. Under my name, using my social security number, linked to an LLC I had apparently co-signed into existence the previous April. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I called my brother. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been expecting my call. "Hey," he said. "So you saw the inquiry?" I asked him what he had done. He explained it to me the way you explain something to a child who you're hoping won't get upset. Calm, methodical, already a few steps ahead. The investment property deal had expanded. He'd needed more capital to make it work. He'd used the LLC, which I was technically co-owner of, he reminded me, per the documents I'd signed, to apply for a business loan. My credit had been used as part of the application. He hadn't moved any of my personal money, he said. He'd been very careful about that. "It's a business loan," he said. "It has nothing to do with your savings account." I asked him what happened if the loan defaulted. There was a pause. "It's not going to default," he said. "This is a solid investment." I asked again. He said something about how in a worst-case scenario there could be some impact on my credit, but that it was very unlikely, and he really believed in this property, and he was going to pay everything back well before it became an issue. I hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen for about 3 minutes doing nothing. Then I went upstairs and told my daughter that I needed to make some phone calls and she needed to be quiet for a little while, even though she was already being quiet. I needed to say it out loud because it made me feel like I had some control over something. Then I called my husband. I have been with my husband for 12 years. He is the kind of person who, when something goes wrong, becomes extremely still and very focused. He does not yell. He does not panic. He just gets very quiet and very precise. I have always found this quality both comforting and slightly terrifying. When I told him what had happened, there was a silence on his end of the line that lasted about 4 seconds. Then he said, very quietly, "Okay, don't do anything yet. Let me call a lawyer." He called a lawyer. We had an appointment the next morning. What I learned in that appointment was not comforting. Because I had co-signed the LLC documents, which I had signed without reading carefully, which I will spend a long time being ashamed of, I was legally a co-owner of the business entity my brother had used to apply for the loan. The loan was in the business's name, but my personal credit had been used as part of the application. If the loan defaulted, the impact to my credit would be significant. It wouldn't touch our savings account, but it could affect our ability to get a mortgage. The pre-approval we'd been working toward for 2 years could evaporate. The lawyer also told me something that made my chest feel tight in a very specific way. She said that depending on how my brother had represented the situation to the lender, and depending on what exactly he'd told them about my awareness and consent, there were scenarios where what he'd done could constitute fraud. She said I should document everything, every conversation, every text, every email. I drove home in the rain and sat in the car for 10 minutes before going inside. Here's the thing about having a sibling who has been taking advantage of people your whole life. You always know, on some level. You're not surprised. You're hurt, but you're not surprised. And then you get angry at yourself for not being surprised, for not having protected yourself better, for having signed those documents in April without reading them. And then you get angry at him. Properly angry. The kind of anger that fills up your whole chest and sits there. What I had not expected, what blindsided me more than the credit inquiry itself, was what I found out 3 days later. I had been going through the LLC documents more carefully, the way I should have done in April. My name was on everything. Co-owner equals stake. But there was also a clause I hadn't noticed initially. buried in the operating agreement, about authorized signatories. My brother had listed himself as the sole authorized signatory for financial decisions, which meant that legally, while I owned half the company on paper, I had effectively signed away my ability to have any meaningful oversight of what he did with it. When I called him to ask about this, he told me that was standard language, that it was just to make the operation simpler, that I didn't need to worry about it. I asked him to tell me exactly what the property was worth, what it had been purchased for, what the loan terms were. He gave me numbers that didn't add up. I'm not a financial expert, but I'm also not an idiot. I have a job in hospital administration that requires me to read budgets and understand basic financial documents. When I started writing down the numbers he was giving me and doing the math, the margins were wrong. The purchase price he mentioned didn't match what I could find in public property records. The loan amount was larger than what the property appeared to justify. I went back to the lawyer. What she told me, carefully and without editorializing, was that there were a few possible explanations. One was that my brother had made some bad financial decisions and was now overextended. Another was that there was something more deliberately deceptive happening. Either way, she said, I needed to take action to protect myself. She helped me begin the process of formally disputing my inclusion in the LLC. Because I had not received any financial benefit, had not been informed of how my credit would be used, and had not consented to the loan application, there was a potential case. It wasn't guaranteed. It would take time, but it was something. She also told me that I should consider reporting the credit inquiry to the lender and explaining that I had not authorized it in the way it had been represented. This could flag the application and potentially trigger an investigation. I asked her what would happen to my brother if that happened. She told me that wasn't really the question I needed to be asking. The question was, what was going to happen to me and my family? She was right. I knew she was right. I just sat with it anyway. I want to be honest about what the next few weeks were like, because I think people sometimes tell these stories in a way that makes them sound clean and decisive, like they knew exactly what to do and did it without hesitation. That is not what happened. What happened was that I went back and forth about it for most of October. My husband was clear. He thought we should report it, dispute everything, and cut off my brother completely. He wasn't angry in a dramatic way. He was just done in that quiet way of his. He'd never fully trusted my brother, and now he felt vindicated in the worst possible way. And I could tell that part of him, the part that loved me, was also exhausted by the years of making excuses for someone who clearly didn't deserve them. I understood his position. I agreed with his position, rationally, but he's my brother. That's the part that's hard to explain if you haven't lived it. Not because he deserved loyalty at that point. He absolutely did not. But because of what it means to finally, permanently close a door on someone you grew up with. Someone who knows things about you that no one else knows. Someone you shared a backseat with on 1,000 car trips when you were kids. It's grief, is what it is. Even when the person is still alive. Even when they did something genuinely terrible to you. You're grieving the relationship you wish you'd had, and the person you kept hoping they'd eventually become. I cried about it more than I want to admit. But here's what made the decision for me. It wasn't the credit inquiry exactly. It wasn't even the potential impact on our mortgage. It was a Tuesday night in late October when my daughter crawled into bed with us at about 2 in the morning because she'd had a bad dream, and she tucked herself in between us the way she does, and she went right back to sleep. And I lay there in the dark, thinking about the down payment we'd been saving for 3 years, and the house with the bigger yard we'd been talking about, where she'd have a room of her own for the first time, and where maybe there'd eventually be space for another kid if we were lucky. And I thought about my brother, asleep somewhere, not thinking about any of this, and something just settled in me. The next morning I called the lawyer and told her to file the dispute. I also, that same morning, called my mother. This part was complicated in its own way. My mother knew, to some degree, what my brother was. She'd been lending him money and covering for him for over a decade, but she'd also never quite admitted it to herself fully, the way some parents can't. When I told her what had happened, she went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Are you sure you have the full picture?" I told her yes, I had all the documents, I had a lawyer, I understood exactly what had happened. She said, "He's going through a really hard time right now." I told her I understood that. I also told her that I was going through a hard time right now, one he had caused, and that I needed her to understand that I was not going to be available to help him through this one. There was a long pause. She said, "I don't want this to come between the family." I told her it already had. And I told her that that wasn't something I had done, it was something he had done. She didn't say much after that. She didn't apologize exactly, but she also didn't argue. And when we hung up, something between us had shifted. Not broken, but shifted. Like something had been said out loud that we'd both been dancing around for years. My brother called me 4 times over the next 2 weeks. I didn't answer. He texted twice, the first time asking if we could talk, the second time saying I was blowing things out of proportion. I forwarded both texts to my lawyer and didn't respond. The dispute process took about 6 weeks. At the end of it, the lender had been notified, the loan application was under review, and my name had been formally removed from the LLC. My credit took a small hit from the inquiry itself, but nothing that permanently damaged our mortgage prospects. Our pre-approval held. We made an offer on a house in December. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a big oak tree, a neighborhood with a good elementary school. We closed in February. On the day we closed, I sat in the parking lot of the title company for a few minutes before going in. I thought about the April morning when I'd signed those documents without reading them. I thought about the $4,000 my parents had given my brother 10 years ago, and the $10,000 after that, and all the small, quiet times he'd taken something that wasn't his, and no one had said anything. I thought about the pattern, how long it had been there, how many people had seen it and chosen not to name it. I thought about my daughter, who was at school right then learning something about fractions, not thinking about any of this at all, which was exactly as it should be. I went inside and I signed the papers. My brother and I have not spoken since October. My mother and I talk occasionally. It's careful now, polite. Like we're both aware of a piece of furniture we're navigating around. I don't know if that will change. I've stopped trying to predict it. What I know is this. I spent a lot of years watching my brother take from the people around him and telling myself it wasn't my place to say something, or that he'd figure it out eventually, or that blood meant I owed him more patience than I'd ever give a stranger who treated me the same way. And the truth is, I was wrong about that. Blood doesn't mean unlimited credit. It doesn't mean you keep offering the same hand to someone who keeps taking more than they were given. Some people will tell you that cutting off a sibling is extreme, that family is family, that you'll regret it someday. Maybe. I can't see the future. But I can tell you that on a quiet Saturday morning in March, I stood in my new kitchen, real hardwood floors, a window above the sink that looks out into the backyard, the oak tree just starting to come back to green, and I made coffee, and I drank it while it was still hot. And I didn't have a single message from my brother to not answer. And that felt, for the first time in a long time, like enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the morning I found the credit inquiry, not the lawyer's office, not even the day we closed on the house. It's the smaller moment. A Tuesday night in late October, my daughter tucked between us in the dark, fast asleep, not carrying a single ounce of what I was carrying. And I thought, she doesn't know any of this is happening. She just trusts that we've handled it. She trusts that the people around her are making good decisions on her behalf. That's what finally made it clear to me. Not anger, just that. My brother had been taking things his whole life. Not always money, sometimes just trust, sometimes just time. And the people around him kept allowing it because allowing it felt like love. My parents called it support. I called it patience. But there's a version of love that isn't actually love at all. It's just conflict avoidance, wearing love's clothes. I signed those documents in April without reading them carefully. I know that. I've sat with that. There's no version of this story where I'm entirely without responsibility for what happened, and I think it matters to say that out loud. Wisdom, real wisdom, isn't just recognizing when someone else is wrong. It's recognizing when you've handed someone the tools to hurt you and told yourself it would be fine. I should have read every page. I should have called a lawyer before I signed anything. I knew my brother's pattern and I looked the other way because it was easier. That was a failure of judgment, and it cost me months of stress and nearly cost us something we'd worked 3 years to build. But here's what I also learned. Knowing you made a mistake doesn't mean you keep paying for it indefinitely. Accountability doesn't require you to stay in the path of someone who isn't going to stop. What it took to get through it wasn't any single quality in isolation. It took honesty. With myself first, about what I'd allowed and why. It took the willingness to sit in a lawyer's office and hear things I didn't want to hear, and then to make decisions based on reality instead of hope. And it took something harder to name, the kind of quiet stubbornness that keeps you moving forward even when you're grieving a relationship at the same time you're protecting yourself from it. Those things together, the honesty, the clear thinking, the refusal to quit, that's what got us to the other side. I don't think my brother is a villain in the movie sense. I think he is someone who learned very early that charm could substitute for character, and that the people who loved him would keep covering the gap. That's a painful way to live, actually. I think about that sometimes. But I also think about my daughter, in her new room, with the oak tree outside her window, doing her homework at a desk we picked out together. I think about what I want her to understand about how the world works, that your choices have weight, that trust is built slowly and can be broken quickly, and that protecting what you've built isn't selfishness. It's responsibility. We closed on the house in February. I stood in that kitchen and felt the particular quiet of a decision that is finished, settled, done. I'm still learning how to not brace for the next thing. But that morning, coffee hot, backyard, coming back to green, I was just here. That was enough.